Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to our second webinar leading up to Archives of the Impossible 2, Transnationalism, Transdisciplinarity, Transcendence, which will take place at Rice University, May 11th through the 13th. So coming up soon. A couple logistic notes before we get going here. There is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen when Yvonne and I shift the genre, as it were, to the Q&A session, which will happen somewhere a bit after the half hour. Please put your questions in the Q&A and I'll read those to Yvonne. Also, I will use your name unless you tell me otherwise. If you don't want your name repeated, then tell me that in the question. Otherwise, I'll assume you do, and we'll have a conversation. Also, it'll feel a bit rude, but we will have a hard stop in exactly an hour. I'll say goodbye, and the thing will shut off at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or whatever time zone you're in. Okay? All right. So here we go. I want to welcome Yvonne Chireau. Welcome to our webinar. And I want to introduce her as the Peggy Chan Professor of Black Studies and Professor in the Department of Religion at Swarthmore College. Yvonne is the author of a number of books, including Black Magic, Religion in the African American Conjuring Tradition, which came out in 2003. She is also the author of a very important website that we'll talk about called the Academic Hoodoo. Hoodoo spelled Hoodoo, academichoodoo.com. And I think the other thing I'll say here is we interacted most recently at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California. That's about 2.5 years ago now, or a year and a half. It's been a while from COVID, but that's really where we interacted around the category of Black superhumanisms that hopefully we could talk about. So welcome, Yvonne. Welcome to the webinar.
Thank you. It's always such a joy to talk to you. It's such a pleasure. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, I don't know where it's going to go either. It always goes somewhere that you don't expect. The point of these 3 webinars, and this is our second. Our first was with Gustavo last week, historian of science, and our third is with Josh Cutchin next week. The point of the webinars is to sort of set the tone and lead up to the conference in May. And really, maybe we can start here. Really, the point of this is to create a space that where people feel comfortable and say things they're not supposed to say, perhaps. And sort of this space between the literal believer and the debunker, this sort of place in the middle, this big place in the middle where things can be taken very seriously but also somewhat playfully sometimes, and we can do things that we otherwise can't do. So I don't know, maybe just tell us something about yourself. Tell us about your life and how you got into this crazy business, and what on earth are you doing here? I guess is the question.
Yeah. No, it's wonderful. It's a wonderful project, and whenever I put not an ad, but I put something on my Facebook page, Archives of the Impossible. What a great idea, right? Because it's intriguing, right? This idea that there are things that are impossible that we somehow, as scholars, and particularly scholars of religion, can make thinkable or plausible, or however you think about it. So me, I am a religionist, and I just always want to be clear about that, because not many people know what that is, but I'm firmly in the discipline of religion, if we can even call that a discipline. So I say that because my work kind of straddles different areas, different categories. So, as you know from our conversations, I'm interested in this idea of magic and supernaturalism and religion. But I mainly focus on African American, Africana religion. So it's a very interesting thing that our categories, we've sort of outgrown them, and so that and some of us in this field spend our lives critiquing the categories. So I love this notion of the impossible. So what does that mean when you're talking to a religionist? What does that mean when you're talking to a scientist? And the thing I really dig about what you're doing is that you are bringing science and scientists into this conversation. And I don't know how I feel about that. Science has a kind of prestige in our world, and religion, I don't know, in this time and place, yeah. But that's true of the US. It might not be true in other areas. So about me, so yeah, religion. I love religion. I really do. I love religions. I love to think about religions. I love to talk to religious people. And I love to theorize about religion. So that's where I'm coming from. But this idea of magic, I can't seem to get away from it. And it's something that's in the air. You mentioned my book. Now my book, when you said it was 2003, it's 20 years. And I would think that I would have moved on from that. But in the past couple of years, I've seen sort of a resurgence of interest in hoodoo, or what, I can explain what hoodoo is, or what I call African American magic. So again, the terms are contested, and we can talk about that. But that's what I do. That's what I love to do the most.
Yeah, I mean, well, the book, of course, goes after the category of religion quite a bit, and messes with it in some pretty creative and of course, I think really historically accurate ways. I mean, one of the points you make is the category doesn't quite work for these traditions, and there's all this other stuff that's mixed up, as it were. That I think people want to think of religion as some kind of pure essence or pure category, and magic has always, in the West at least, and the European history has held this dubious place, let us say, vis-a-vis monotheism or theism. And I think you do a really powerful job of showing how that's not really accurate. And
Yeah, and that I just came out of this is our last week of class here, but I taught a class this semester called Magic Theory and Practice, and it was funny when I advertised it. I had Harry Potter up there, sort of playing on that. But what I would love to see nothing more is looking at magic historically, or whatever way, from the insight from a religious studies point of view. And the students are interested in this. They're interested in the history of the idea. They're interested in why we have these distinctions between magic, religion, and of course I have to talk about science, right? So there's so much for us to talk about, and I would love to see more of that. But even when I offered the course, it's like some of the heads were like, huh? And yet, in literature, people study witchcraft, and so these categories, again, I think that religion has a lot to say about these things. And so yeah, that this is something I see as opening up, and judging by the interest in what's impossible, or these conversations, I don't think people even know. I think as we're learning, people want to talk about this, and they want to talk about experiences as well. So I am also interested, and I know you are interested in not so much our subjects and, yeah, ethnography is great. We want, but, these conversations within ourselves as scholars, because, if you nibble around the edges, no one's certain. And so to me, those are sometimes the most interesting conversations to have, amongst us, but opening those up for people to hear. So yeah, so this idea of magic. And then the other thing that I was playing on, that I'm fascinated by is race. And so I called it Black magic. And believe it or not, when this book came out, people were very angry with me. Like, oh, what are you saying about Black religion? Because, I'm in religion. And so even that, so there's a history to that. And, we're still having these conversations. I was at a conference last year, and, it's like, well, do you really want to use that word magic to describe Africana religions? Yes, because it is a contested idea and it gets us into this notion. So so that's something that's really opening up conversations for me. And let me just say this one more thing, because this is what I absolutely love to do. My website is called Academic Hoodoo, but if you go on there, and it hasn't been updated lately, but it's a place for me to think about some of these ideas of Africana religions, African American religions, but do it through the lens, the rubric, and the problem of this notion of voodoo, not hoodoo. Hoodoo is sort of what that book was about, the Black magic, but voodoo. Voodoo to me, and when you asked me to come here, I said, oh, well, what is impossible in my field? Voodoo represents the impossible. And what I mean by that is, as soon as I said that word, everyone in the audience had a picture. They're like, oh, voodoo is this thing, whether it's, George Bush Sr. and his supply side voodoo economics, or whether it's something else. And it's that something else that has really intrigued me. So the impossible part is, of course, Haiti. Haiti achieved the impossible in 1804, right? So this island, this one of the richest colonies in the world, achieves independence. This group of enslaved people, African, Creole, colored, Black people achieve independence. All right, and this is a story that is mythical. All right, it sends shockwaves throughout the Western Hemisphere. No colony had ever done this. That's impossible. But the impossible part really is this notion of voodoo, right? So voodoo, as we know, or as we're learning, had something to do with that event. Now, this is where it gets tricky, and this is what I'm talking about a lot on my website. There is a religion, there are religions that are named in a certain way, voodoo, or it's really voodoo in the Creole, but then they are interpreted as, and this notion of voodoo, anyone listening to this has heard me rant about this, it becomes kind of a synecdoche for talking about African supernaturalism, magic, the impossible stuff. And that becomes a label that has become affixed to our notions of Black spirituality, all the way down to the present day. So to me, it's an interesting problem. And how that gets expressed, whether it is George Bush Sr., whether it is the voodoo doll, these images of magic, Black magic, and so forth. So what I've been doing over the years on that website is kind of unrolling that idea. How does it get represented, and what forms does it take? All the while saying, look, this is impossible. There's no voodoo. There is no voodoo. There are sacred traditions that are called Voodoo, but there's no voodoo. So anyway, that's been sort of that was going to be the topic of my blog, and then I got distracted. But really interested in this idea of Africana spirituality, in particular notions of the supernatural, notions of and ideas that we would call impossible. That really is something that's so compelling to me. And I love being in conversation with my peers about this stuff.
Do people interact with you around their? I mean, I know the answer to this, but I guess it's a kind of baiting question. Do people interact with your ideas through their own experiences? I mean, there's there's definitely this political history and this racial history behind all of this. And then there's also people who, of course, come to it with their own understandings and their own prejudice and their own, everything really. But they also have experiences that they're going to call, I think, fairly accurately magical. And
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
mean, this was sort of the topic that we had in Big Sur was, actually these categories work fairly well to describe these Africana spiritualities. But they're not just ideas, or they're not abstract belief systems. They actually are describing actual human experiences as well, that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
people want to that people do call magical. Um,
Absolutely. And this is in the class this semester, I had a number of guests, and the very last one actually is a magician. He's a chaos magician. He's also initiated as an unga, uh,
mhm.
which is a male priest in the religion of Haitian Voodoo. And I actually asked him about this question. Okay, well, where's the religion? Where's the magic in what you do? And he was he so as a practitioner, he talked a lot about his experience, and he has as I think many initiates do, they have a dividing line between what is considered religion, according to our category of religion, the doctrines, the rules, the reglement, whatever, and then magic, which is, what people, the efficacy. So the short answer is these notions of supernaturalism do not make or break the idea of magic versus religion in Africana traditions. And
Yeah.
what I mean by this is, I think in some ways it's, and we saw this at our meeting. The meeting was called the Black Superhuman, that the supernaturalism, or what anthropologists call supernatural, it is part and parcel about of what it means to be a religious or a spiritual person. I'm not going to
Yeah.
even say religion now, because my students, they're all spiritual, they're not religious, but that people live within these traditions, within an enchanted universe, and they have done that for centuries. And so the anthropologist comes along and imposes the category, oh, this is super, and it in some ways it doesn't make sense. So even having people talk about their experiences, talk about their ancestors, talk about their relationships with beings that are invisible, or it's so embedded. It's such a part of African
Yeah.
American, or I would say Africana cultures, that it's almost like a second language. So sometimes we have to code switch and say, oh, okay, so when we talk about talking to the dead, and hearing from the dead, it's so normal. And then the scholars saying, interrogating it, what's going on. So that's really interesting to me, and I wonder about that. I wonder how much of it is cultural, how much of this is racial, in the differences and the comfort that we have with this. I mean, even I know scientists, my father was an engineer, and they're very comfortable experiencing and living this world that I think the word that they like to use now is enchanted, sort of taking apart that notion of the disenchantment of society. And I think there's a lot more of that. We don't talk about it that much publicly. So I love your project, because once people get going, they'll tell you about their experiences, and there's no shame about it. And I will just say that yes, these I have to put this in a way that doesn't get me in trouble. There was a time even, when I presented a paper on hoodoo, and I remember, and I'll call out the organization. This is probably one of the oldest organizations for the study of Black religion. And I did a paper on hoodoo. I was young and doing my dissertation. I didn't know anything, and I was earnest. And the stone faces and this, most of these people are coming from a Christian tradition, fine. I wouldn't say conservative, but there was a time when these traditions that I was speaking so eagerly about were considered, you just didn't talk about them. And so that was one of the worst talks I ever gave. They're sitting there, they're not even smiling. And now it's sort of, it's, you can talk about that. So I had to think about a time when there wasn't a sympathy for this, and that even in my own experience, but it's political. And so, and we can talk about why Black people have had, why their traditions have been contested, or why Black Christianity even itself, there's sort of been this play or this fear, and of talking about things that are magical. And then we can get into the spookiness, because as you know, my current work on comics, I'm writing about comics and Black religion. So much of this, the idiom is that of horror. So how we get from the sacred, the Africana sacred, to horror, that's mind blowing, because to me, Haiti, okay, going back to Haiti, for those people who freed themselves, that's not horror, but it reverberates in the West as horror. What did that evangelist say? That they made a deal with the devil, every kind of thing. So voodoo becomes this discourse for talking about not just supernaturalism, but Black power in a way. And so I'm like, oh man, I have to deconstruct this category. And there's so many ways you can do that. So I think I lost your question.
That's okay.
But
I think you and I have probably talked about this, but have we talked about Vicki Nelson?
no,
Vic-
maybe.
Victoria Nelson's her name. She's a literary critic, and she wrote this book called The Secret Life of Puppets.
No.
Oh yeah, you absolutely have to read this book. Her basic argument is that horror is a kind of devolution or disfiguring of a sense of the sacred, and that it's a result of really centuries of dismissal and debunking, particularly in Europe and America. And she really sees horror as a kind of it's a camouflage of the sacred, but it's been disfigured. And I'll just tell you, I'll just give you a hook or a link. I was on a panel at Arizona State University last month. It was Zoom. I wasn't in Arizona, and it was on space exploration and religion. And it was Mary Jane Rubenstein that actually was the woman who was helping co-host it. And the question was, what aspect of religion would have to be most rethought if we made full contact with with another species? And I said two things. I said, well, first of all, we've already made full contact. We've had contact for thousands of years. It's called religion, folks.
Thank you.
Yeah. But secondly, I really think the thing that has to be rethought is demonology, because what people do is they demonize other people's religious experiences, and they demonize anything and everything that doesn't fit into their little world. And I just can't tell you how many times that has happened with experiencers that I know, is they get called, they're working with demons. They're not having, they're not experiencing some kind of spectral presence or other species or whatever it is. They're in league with demons.
Absolutely.
And I just think that it's just way too easy, and it's suspiciously easy, and it's judgmental. And I think that that's partly behind a lot of this project, this Archives of the Impossible project, is, well, what happens to our categories if we suddenly actually take people's experiences seriously, and we don't demonize them and we don't rationalize them? we we listen, and maybe these things actually happen to people, and they're telling us the best they have it.
Yeah, the flip side of that though, and the demonizing is, I mean, yeah, that's right on point. I'll try to find this book, but I like the idea of the camouflage of the sacred, but I would also ask, when was the Africana sacred ever sacred? When in the West was Black
Yeah,
spirituality
yeah,
ever sacred? So, so something is happening there with horror. I think it has more to do with the return of the repressed than anything else. But I'm learning more about it. But to me, the flip side of this is not the demonizing, but the ridicule. Okay,
yeah,
so this is the history of magic, right? Whether it's
yeah,
more so, because there's magics. So there's the ceremonial and the esotericists, and I'm sure there's a few that are, the brother this and and I'm kind of mocking them, but the puffy literate magic folks. There's Black folk there, by the way. Okay, probably one of the most important Black magicians, Black or white, in the 19th century, P.B. Randolph. And then you
yeah,
have the folk, the ones who don't read, the ones who don't know anything, and they have a kind of magic, so that's associated with the poor. But there's still magics, right? But the flip side of the demonizing is the ridicule, right? These ignorant folk, these dumbasses, and that goes on today, of course.
oh yeah,
Where's it
absolutely.
coming from? So the scientists are gonna, they might not put it like that because scientists are, you know, scientists, but it's sort of a ridicule, these simple, ignorant, and if, right, this is, what is Fraser, right? The evolution. If we could just, yeah, you had your primitive, stupid ass magic, and then we had religion, we found Jesus, and yeah, but we're headed it's this teleology. We're headed toward science. And I tell my students, and we read about this, right? The Golden Bough and all of that. And the end is we all have big heads, and we know everything. So, and I really do believe that's part of what's going on, when I talk to folk. And it's fine. Again, I'm a flower child. I love everyone. But the flip side of the demonization, which I think is just as problematic, is the ridicule. And sometimes it's a subtle ridicule, and we'll see this, I imagine, in the audience, by marginalizing. This is even too dumb for us to consider talking about. These poor people, these poor, pathetic people who believe in, ancestral spirits, or that Africans can fly, or whatever they believe. So
Do you
yeah.
do you think there's a racial or a kind of racism behind um, the rejection of the paranormal or the magical? I mean, is that your argument, that there's some kind of, I mean, because I can definitely see that there's a kind of, there's a dismissal of the magical or the supernatural as black, I mean, hence the phrase black magic, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah,
this is not a positive thing for people, and blackness itself has very negative connotations in certainly in the Western religious imagination, but of course in many religious imaginations.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
I just,
but
it's a question.
I don't. It's a complicated racism, and I will say that it belies. It's not, because I think true racism or any true white supremacy is like, yeah, but I think it belies a fear of the impossible. Okay,
Yeah,
you look at what happened after Haiti.
yeah,
This was impossible.
yeah,
How could these primitive, magical, because they start immediately, they blamed it on these, how could this happen? Will it ever, oh my God, will it happen here? So if it was pure race, I mean, yeah, it was racism, but why would they have a fear that that could happen here? And this is also what I found in the American South in my study of hoodoo. These silly, ignorant Negroes, yes, and then they get together and there's an uprising that has a magical basis, like in the conspiracy in South Carolina in the early 19th century. So I think it's a racism, but it's a racism of fear rather than
Yeah,
a racism of supremacy.
I
Wow,
see. I
what if
see.
it works? Holy shit! You know, and I make light of it, but I think that also has a lot to do with why some of these traditions that I look at, they go underground. So you can hardly find sources. Even when I wrote my book on what people are actually doing, you most people know my beloved mentor Albert Rabbitoe called the complex among enslaved Africans and African Americans. And I focused in my book on enslaved people. The complex of traditions was invisible. He called it the invisible institution because it was underground, or there wasn't a name for it. It wasn't magic, it wasn't religion, it wasn't Christian, it wasn't this. And I actually see a lot of that. And this is one of the beautiful things about what I study. And you know, that whether or not they call themselves Christians, or whether or not, you know, or Muslims, or Ifa, there is an impulse. There is a shared impulse. I'm not going to call it magical, but there's something. And your beautiful colleague and my brother, Anthony, Dr. Pinn, he talks a lot about this. You know, what is the impulse that all Black religions draw upon? I think it's a kind of, I'll say supernaturalism, but people don't like that. I'll say spirituality, people don't like that either. But there's something that they share. And I think that it has something to do with what you're calling the impossible, things that cannot be talked about in
Yeah.
rational ways, things that people share that, you know, when they get together, they can talk about it because everyone understands the language and the code. So, so yeah, a long answer to say I wouldn't. It's not just simple racism. If racism is simple, but there's a lot of layers going on to how people perceive what the other is doing. So yeah, of course, race has a lot to do with it. Uh, uh, how these traditions are understood.
I mean, I'm just thinking of our own academic world, you know, where reason and logic and analysis are kind of held up as sort of the core of the enterprise. And really what the impossible is really a form of magical thinking. And that's a cut down, you know, that's a bad, you just got called a bad name, you know, there, at least in the academic world. So I think it is, and the reason we came up with this category, first of all, lots of people talk about the impossible. I didn't, of course, make it up, but it's useful because what I've found over and over again is that people have experiences all the time that can't possibly happen, but of course happen. And impossibility is a function of how we think about reality. It's actually not a function of reality. It's a function of our categories and our cultures. And once you shift cultures or shift your attitudes or assumptions, then it the impossible is possible, as I say. It's and people, you know, that makes sense to people actually. That then you start talking a different kind of language. And
Yeah.
okay, so let me shift it. Let me shift it, Yvonne, and then we'll open it up. But here's the question that's been popping around in my head. Your students,
Yeah.
who are my students too. I mean, they're not the same people, but they're same generation. Do you think there's more, I mean, you suggested earlier that there's more openness to this. You did. And do you think it's a function of our students and a kind of unbelief or a kind of secularism or a kind of being spiritual but not religious, or however you want to frame that? I know each of those frames does different things, but is there, I mean, because I do feel, I'll put my cards on the table. I do think we're in a different zeitgeist today than we were 30 years ago, when at least as I was leaving graduate school, I left graduate school in 93, just to date me. Um, I was trained in the late 80s. Wow, you couldn't do this then.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, this was unthinkable. And I don't mean it was not allowed. I do not mean that. I mean, it just didn't occur to anyone. It's like it was literally unthinkable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just not now. It's just
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, yeah. And this is something I don't have a form theory about it, but as I said, I taught a course on magic theory and practice this semester, and I couldn't have done that before. I mean, I actually they didn't even like bringing ministers to classes, 20 years ago. It was like, so because we're world religions, we don't want to be Christian, so the discipline itself has gone through a lot of weird things that just passed over me. But I said, how can I teach a course on magic and not bring some practicing magicians? So the
Right.
students, they're like, yeah, because, we can talk about it now. We can talk about anything now in the class, unless you're in Florida. Okay, so,
Or Texas, by the way.
okay, I'm sorry to anyone out there, but
Yeah, yeah.
I'm making light of it, but it might come to that. But my point is that you're teaching a course on world religions or whatever. Yeah, you have a practitioner come, maybe, but even that wasn't done, and now maybe they're turning back to it. But I found that my students are asking questions because they feel like they can. I mean, this is the internet thing, right? You can talk about and ask anything. So one of the wonderful things about teaching a class on magic, everyone comes in with ideas about it. So like most young people, they're eager to learn. They're eager to learn things. And again, I actually love living in the internet age. I just posted this thing on my Facebook about when Mr. Spock, he had his computer. I said, I want to be in that world one day. And, I was just really happy. No one understands that. But we're in a world where the information is available. So I think that young people and my students, the information is available. They just need to have it in front of them. So I'm teaching a course on religion and magic in the religion department. And so my students, they're coming from religious backgrounds, fundamentalists, a lot of international students here. So they're and secularists. I had some Masons. I didn't know there were teen Masons. So the classroom is the place where you want to do this stuff. And
Yeah.
so I think that because young people have everything available to them thanks to the internet, and this is what one of my guests said. They said, there's no secrets even in magic. You can Google and find out how to do the most esoteric and complex of spells or whatever you want to call it. So the information is there. I think students feel, and young people, actually maybe even a little bit older, that this is something that they want to learn about because it was either suppressed or which is odd, right? We teach in religion, it's like some you don't talk about certain things. So, and I remember when I first heard of you, and I'm going to say I'm not going to embarrass you, but this was years ago at one of those American Academy, our academic conferences. And there was this buzz, and this was years ago, Jeff. So Jeff, oh, did you read what the Chronicle of Higher Education said about this man? And so I remember going to that session. And it was packed, and I'm looking at and everybody. I was like, but what are they excited about? He's talking about things that we've been looking at for. So, and I love that but I thought you were a celebrity, but it turns out you're really nice. But I remember it was like, yeah, it might take people like yourself, not to make it legitimate, these conversations, but, you have to be fearless or wacky, which is great but, it just surprised me because again, in the traditions that I study and the people that I know, this is like, yeah, this is normal. But so that's interesting to me. When did this why were they like, oh, Jeff Kripal, oh, he's breaking things. Now that I know you, I'm so happy
Yeah,
you are weird, but I really, really do. I do like what you're doing. And I see what you're trying to do.
yeah. Well, thank you. I actually remember that. Actually, I remember that. That was a packed. That was a weird event, actually, and the room was like overflowing into the hall. It was. I was like, I don't know what this is about.
That was like, is Prince coming or something?
Yeah, yeah. He didn't actually. No, no Prince. Yeah. Okay. Listen. I'm starting to get nervous here because you're talking about me. I don't want to do that. And we're getting a lot of questions,
Okay.
which is good, Yvonne. And what I'm going to do, again, I'm going to read names, and I'm going to do a couple of 2 or 3 of these at a time because there's about 6 of them already, and I know from past experience we won't get through things if we don't read them, and then you can just respond however you see fit.
Great.
So the first one is from Joel Adifone. You know Joel? Okay. Yvonne and Jeffrey, has there been any recent documentation on the phenomena of the flying Africans and Afro-diasporic PK phenomena? And then Joel also asked, can you share some of the work being done in the field of Black superhumanism and or what was talked about at Esalen? So we'll start there.
Okay. Well, as far as the Black superhumanism, this is, and again, thank you to our host. I had never been to Esalen. Now I want to move there. It was a spectacular venue to bring together some of the senior scholars and people, not just senior scholars, but people who are doing interesting work on African American and religions. But it's a talk. It's an emerging conversation. But for us, for that group, and I'll just say this: the question of superhumanism was problematized, right? Because again, when has the Black person been human? When did the Black become human? And when did the Black become superhuman or dehuman? Or so we spent a lot of time wrestling with that. Now, we understood what the charge was, to think about how of these ideas that Jeff and others are talking about, especially this notion of super religion, which is really, again, this is one of my favorite ideas and a wonderful textbook that Jeff Kripal put together. But whether these notions apply to African American experience. So we just spent a lot of time like sifting through that. So without coming to conclusions, which is fine. But as far as you mentioned the Flying Africans story, and something else, the PK, which I didn't get, but the Flying Africans, this of course is a trope, a theme of folklore that comes from African American people that sort of euphemizes the notion of freedom, and with this beautiful idea of African sprouting wings that finds its way into different kinds of folklore, supernatural lore in during slavery and after. So you're asking what the question was, is there any new research on it? I don't know if it's new research, but there's a lot of research that's been done by Black scholars of religion. I'll say there's a lot trying to interpret that as, and I don't want to drop names of people. Jason Young, I'll drop a name. Jason Young has written an article that actually talks about this. Well, this might not be metaphor, and especially if we look at this using the lens of religion, because we're, the imaginal and, the real intersect. So that's one reference. I don't know if there's anything new, but there's been a lot done on the Flying Africans. The second part, I didn't quite get. You said PK, was that?
Yeah, it says
PK.
Afro-diasporic PK phenomena. No, it's okay.
But yeah, the Flying Africans, find Jason Young's articles, beautiful article he wrote for the Journal of Africana religions that sort of tackles that, and there's a lot of wonderful strands. This is a theme that comes out in I'll say folklore, but in the visual, really wonderful stuff. So yeah, but I don't
I,
know what
w-
the PK is. Sorry.
I will say, Joelle, there's a book coming out from Yale probably the fall called They Flew. And the subtitle is A History of the Impossible.
No.
No, yeah, really. It's by a historian named Carlos Ayer, and it's about mostly Italians, by the way, Italians and Spanish women who flew or levitated or floated. And he does some really interesting things. He does not dismiss these witness testimonies, and I think it's not about, again, it's not about Africans, but it's about Spaniards and the Italians. So we're, I
What
guess,
period? What
just
period is?
across
What
the sea.
what period is that?
17th century.
Oh, this is excellent. Okay,
Six, 16th, 17th century mostly. Yeah.
so comparatively, again,
Yeah.
this is a theme that you can look at, and this is, and I'll say this is one of the wonderful things at that we did at Esalen. We were looking at Africana traditions comparatively, and I think one of yeah, things like psi phenomena, whether you can, what Africana religions have to say about psi or African experiences. So, trying to bring that language into with a lens on Black religious traditions. It's interesting, but we're just getting started. We
Yeah.
actually have a lot of fun at Esalen. We're not always working, but
So, okay, so two more. These are related actually. Skylar Phillips asks, with your academic background, what are your thoughts on Spawn, the comic character? Okay, so that's the first one. By the way, I have no thoughts about that. Maybe you do, Yvonne. The second one's from John Martin. I know that both of you have an interest in comics and the representations of the supernatural, the superhuman, or the impossible. I'm curious why you were both drawn to this particular cultural form. For many of us, comics may have been our first encounter with the impossible after or instead of religion, but was that the case for you or your students?
Hmm. For me, my students, well, my students don't really know that I'm doing this, but yeah, it's the geek thing. It's the geek thing. I don't, I've been interested in comic studies. It seems to be a closed, group of people that look at it. And like so many things, people leave out religion and religion. So there's a lot of that's been written on Black comics and comics creators and but religion. So it's kind of new. That's what drew me to it, but it's really the geek thing. Spawn, yeah, Spawn. I actually like the movie better than the comic, but I have my favorites. The thing that's really interesting to me about comics, spirituality, and religion, whatever you call it, is the intersection with Afrofuturism, which seems to be a kind of it's just utterly fascinating where these notions of ancestralism intersect with Afrofuturism. Afrofuturism is kind of an arts kind of political movement. That's where you find magic. And it's so clear. So I'm interested in that as well as the 20th century comics that Jeff and I love because we're older geeks. But that's why I got into it. And Spawn, yeah, maybe, yeah,
Yeah, we don't all have to be Spawn fans.
yeah.
Maybe we are. I don't know. All right, so here's another one. This is interesting. I am interested in the topic of ecological crisis. Oh, this is Samantha McBride, I should say the name. Samantha asks, I am interested in the topic of ecological crisis among people who have had anomalous experiences,
Mm.
just starting the research. Does Dr. Chireau have thoughts on this topic as it relates to her work?
Ecological crisis. Well, This is a burgeoning field. There's different ways of thinking about it: environmental studies, critical environmental studies, and so forth, eco spirituality, and so forth. So as far as what I'm interested in, again, the Africana traditions, I look for eco theologies and ways that, Black people have sort of spoken to a crisis that is not new for them. And you can go all the way back to indigenous traditions, African traditions or African American traditions to see that. Some really fascinating work is being done. uh, and it's not so much in religious studies, but thinking about, the relationship of the human to the earth. But it's not so much a part of what I'm looking at, except to say that, like Native American, I'll put this in air quotes because we're not even clear that Native American religions are religions in the way that religions have been defined. But there seems to be an attempt to recover a lot of the spiritual sensibilities that Native Americans have brought with respect to the human relationship to the earth. You find a lot of those themes in indigenous African religions as they are being reinterpreted in Black America. So what I'm saying is, there's sort of I'm not going to call it revival, but there's a resurgence of Black American people and young people who are turning, and I'm not saying they're turning away from the Christian churches, that they might be, but they are turning to African-based religions, which always have this strong component of relating to nature, whether through nature spirits or through other ways. So yeah, the long and short of it is, yes, there's a lot that Africana religions have to say about the crisis, as you put it, that comes through the traditions themselves. And but I do find, again, the young people are sort of leading the charge. They are turning to these religions, and these are religions of initiation with a new interest. So, and I'm thinking of not just Haitian Voodoo, of course, but other African-derived religions, uh, Santeria, and Ifa. So you will find there's a nature religion component. I use the air quotes because, again, the categories are fraught, and I think scholars have tried to make sense of this. But these are part of the spiritual traditions from Africa from way back. Yeah, I hope that answered your question. I'm not sure I got it.
No, no, you got it. I would just add to that, Samantha, that a lot of anomalous experiences involve a kind of ecological punch in the sense that the person's not separate from the environment. There's a kind of wholeness or unity there. Um, I'll also say that if you look at something like the UFO phenomenon, there have been two big moral issues from the very beginning. One is nuclear nuclear energy, and the other is ecology. And those have been the two apocalyptic themes of contact experiences for about 70 years now. And I think if you go back to Yvonne, you'd be the expert here. If you go back to the 19th century and look at something like spiritualism, there's a pretty tight relationship between spiritualism and the abolition movement. It's not absolute, but it's definitely there. I mean, there's definitely a kind of prophetic social punch to a lot of these anomalous movements.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned spiritualism, because we talked about that in magic class too. Spiritualism is one of those religious movements that no one's ever heard of, and yet, four out of five people during the mid 19th century either took part in spiritualist seances or had these experiences. So it's one of these religions, that came and went, and it's like, oh, we sort of forgot about it. So that's a good reference.
So here's a couple more. I'll read these. I'm just looking. I'm playing the evil moderator. I'm looking at the clock. We have 9 minutes, by the way. Here's one from Nancy Yao. I'm thinking of categorizations and how people like to categorize things, but everything is not easy to be categorized. We are not built to fit in certain frames. For those cannot be in the frames, people tend to look at them as the impossible. I wonder through the efforts of you wondering out or critiquing the categories, many of which are violent and colonial, do you find categorizations from the past that we have forgotten? In African religions, for example, would you like to bring back for reimagination? That's a lot there, Yvonne, but I think you got the gist of it.
Yeah, are there any categories that we
Yeah.
use to describe these experiences that we might bring back? Um, huh, for a lot of people, hmm, I hate to impose. I hate to impose the categories. I know this is a scholar's game, right? So we say, well, this is magic, this is religion, this is science. But um, as far as the categories, no, but maybe the sensibility. And Jeffrey just used this word of holistic, and this is a word that's been bounced around a lot. That it's actually a word that I've seen a lot in New Age circles. That there's no separation. That there's sort of a oneness. But those sorts of sensibilities and categories, they're embedded in indigenous traditions, and indigenous traditions go back thousands of years. So it's not new. It's not a new term, and it's not a new category per se. So yeah, maybe we just recover ways of seeing that, or and ways of experiencing that other people have talked about. But we always get into a problem because we kind of other people. So I yeah I'm not quite sure how to answer that question, but I think that our categories are already there, and even the words that we use, uh, the sensibilities by which we talk about it. And I really I love this idea of the holistic notion. So if that's what you were asking, yeah, I think that the terms are there for us to recover them from the people who've been experiencing this for much longer than we've even been here in this land.
Yeah. Let me just read these last. I'm not sure these are questions or comments, but you can
I'll take them. Yep.
respond to them as a trio. The first one's from Gail George. I have a question about some of the phenomena that have been reported surrounding ritual and the initiation process. Malidomas, Malidomasoma
Hmm. Hmm.
describes describes the gravity-defying preparations for the voyage into the afterlife and impossible synchronicities that could be defined as magic. Okay. Also, any thoughts about plant medicines and magic in the context of African spiritual culture? Okay,
Oh.
that's one. Let me get them all in because, again, we're going to run out of time. Jean-Louis Brodeau writes, is not magic also a way to poke fun at mainstream religion and hence also an artistic pursuit by singular jokers?
Mhm.
Um, Also, Darby Orcutt, I like this Darby. This person writes, those ecological themes continually recur as well as in Bigfoot experiences and narratives, which is true, they do. And finally, Skylar Phillips, where can I read more about concepts you've discussed today? Also, thank you for answering my questions earlier. Um, Let me just answer Skylar's and then turn it over to you. I mean, Skylar, I think if you go to academichoodoo.com or you go to the website for Archives of the Impossible, you'll get some more things to read. Um, you can follow these tracks there. But so let's go,
Yeah.
Yvonne, let maybe go to Gail, Jean-Louis, and Darby as you see fit.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm looking at Gail's question, and you'll have to forgive me. I've been very undisciplined about that website, but I didn't put up an under renovation, but it is literally academichoodoo.com is under renovation. But if you go there, there are some resources. There's some older materials. I love Gail's question because right now at Swarthmore College, we are having a conference right now that talks about Africana traditions in relation to plants, healing, and LSD. So it's something that's in the air. A few weeks ago, there was someone talking about African American relationships to the mushroom. The mushrooms are hot. Mushrooms are hot, and I like to eat mushrooms, so I know that. So there is sort of a new kind of scholarship that looks at these old topics through the lens of African American traditions. Malidome Some, of course, has done so much for the late Malidome Some for bringing in indigenous African ways of seeing to the Western audiences. As far as the initiation experiences, yes, but absolutely, any initiation, you're going to have experiences, right? So whether you're initiated into the priesthood, and Jeff might be able to tell more about this, in the Catholic tradition, whether you're initiated, in the magical tradition, and whether you're initiated in the tradition of Voodoo, this initiation that's what it is. It initiates an experience or a relationship either to a deity or to a tradition. So miracles happen, or miracle is the approved word. Impossible things happen. It's one of the reasons why people want to become part of these. There's something that's just very real and wonderful. And Malidome Some, of course, was one of the people who brought a lot of these traditions to the West for Western consumers. So we're grateful for him. But yes, absolutely. I'm not going to say get initiated, because like any magic, like any initiation, it is life transforming. But yes, these experiences that are impossible, or that would be called impossible, are part of the experience, because that is what it is. You are expanding your ability to recognize or to experience something. So it's a wonderful thing. But I'll just say that you don't have to go to magical traditions to have initiations. You can go to therapy and have initiations. So that's just the framework that people use to think about it. So yes, I hope that answered it, Gail.
Yeah, Yvonne, I'm gonna play the
Oh,
evil moderator.
past six. We're past six. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
no, it's okay. We're at the top of the hour, and so I'm just going to have to thank you again and say goodbye to everyone. And you're coming to Houston in a couple weeks, right? I guess it's three. What is it? 3 weeks away now?
We're gonna have so much fun, right?
All right, all right. We'll see you. We'll see you soon, Yvonne. And thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all, and we'll see you tonight, or see you in 3 weeks.